All right, good morning. We'll go ahead and get started with Intacct, a mid-year checkup. So before we get into the thing, I also, in the registration form, I asked some questions. I just wanted to go through what some of the answers were so we can see where we stand, or I use that to help with, fine-tune the presentation. How often do we view encumbrance balances for accuracy and research any older balances? So we have varying answers. So most everyone views it on daily, weekly, monthly basis, so that's great. That would vary by everybody. There's no right answer for that. It depends on the amount of activity your program has. So if you're doing more and more purchasing transactions, hopefully we're looking at this more frequently, at least weekly, if not daily. If we're not doing as many transactions, then maybe monthly is where we sit on looking at our encumbrances. I asked about some reports, which ones are we using? So obviously the most basic common one we're using is the financial reports. That's the one that had the most responses. And then the purchasing list view, which is of course where we do most of our work. And then the general ledger dimension balances report was the next most frequent one used, and then everyone else is still learning a little bit. So today we're gonna definitely go through at least all of these reports, plus another one not listed here. And then I asked, what do you guys want to see me cover in this specific presentation? So we had some comments about, about budget. So we're not going to do budget mods today, but we'll get into budgets as a topic. Some of us are taking this as a refresher. We want to know more about blanket purchase orders, reports, making sure purchase orders are closed, and how to get an encumbrance list with the vendor name, not just an amount. So here's our agenda today. We'll go through open purchase orders and encumbrances. We'll go through the budget talk I want to have as it refers to the mid-year checkup. We'll look at some reports, and then a new report I made available in the last week about comparing our performance now to the same point last year. So let's get into open purchase orders. So this is taken from the accounting policy manual. So as it concerns outstanding purchase orders, we have to produce an outstanding purchase order report on a monthly basis and agree the encumbrances to our financial reports. So hopefully we're doing this on at least a monthly basis to make sure our reports are accurate. We have to research any purchase orders that are over 60 days old, cancel applicable purchase orders that are no longer valid or are over 60 days old. So that falls in the basis of verifying our encumbrances to our report. But lastly, there is a small exemption to that, and that blanket purchase orders can be used in the instance of recurring monthly expenses, and they might be estimated for a month or the entire year, and that's on the preference of the program director. So if we're looking at older open purchase orders, we don't have to close our blanket ones that we've opened to be used for a period of time or up to the whole fiscal year, is all that's saying. And then I also lifted some information from the super circular that governs federal awards. So we have a responsibility for making sure our financial reports are accurate, current, and complete, and that the records must contain information pertaining to awards, authorizations, financial obligations, basically purchase orders, encumbrances, unobligated balances, assets, expenditures, income and interest, and has to be supported by source documentation. So it's not just the tribe's policies that govern us. If we have federal awards, we have federal laws that tell us what we're supposed to be doing with our finances too. So on a routine basis, we should be reviewing our open POs to ensure bills are getting paid. Close open POs that aren't going to be used. One, it's going to free up our available budget. And two, it's going to update our financial records so that they're accurate and current. It's going to give us an opportunity to look at and see, are there any open balances that seem out of place? Especially at the end of a fiscal year, if we dated a document incorrectly, the release would happen in a different year than the creation of the encumbrance had occurred. We might have had some formatting issues with a blanket PO versus a standard PO. Or it could just be there was an error with an Intacct and that just needs to be addressed. And these are the types of reports that can help us look for these open purchase orders or encumbrances. The purchasing transaction list view, we see it on the other screen. A fair amount of us are using that regularly. A purchasing transaction detail report, so we're going to get into that. Dimension balances report, and a financial report. So we're going to look at all 4 of those today, and we're actually going to get into Intacct now. So I'm signed into Intacct. I'm using a demo account, so it's not my admin account. This is just a demo user that has access to one program, one checkbook. So this just shows everything we're doing is every user here is capable of accessing the same information. The only differences would be what program and checkbook you have access to. So when we're looking for open POs, easiest way to do that is to actually go to the purchase order workflow. So we're going to purchase to order and purchase order. And we're going to look for the POs that aren't converted. So we see a list of all the activity for what this user has access to. But we've got everything that's listed here. You can change the views here because the view is on all. There'll be some available to you that you can use. And so I have 3 available to me. Or we can just simply look for that on screen by filtering. So if we wanted to know our open purchase orders, if I wanted to change the state to include 2 different things, so pending and partially converted, any purchase order with those 2 statuses is telling us that's an open PO. And so if we apply that, we've shorted down that list quite a bit. But if we remember from the presentation earlier, the slide, we're also looking for stuff that's older than 60 days. So we have something from March and February, that's probably not 60 days. So we can use the filter one more time, and we're going to add a date. I want something that's less or equal to, say, 60 days ago is probably January 10th. Now I only have to research 2 to keep up to date with my report and making sure we're meeting the requirements of the accounting manual, making sure our reports are accurate. So we got 2 we got to jump into. So if we look at the first one, we know it's a purchase order to Cherry Todd. And we can see line 1 here was opened with $150 in the quantity field. So far, we've converted $60.09 of that $150. So we have about $90 left on this line to continue to use. And then the second line, we opened it with $300. We've converted $259 so far. So there's about $41 left on this line. The memo in here tells us it's second quarter. So this would be the last month of the second quarter of the fiscal year. So this is likely something that's still going to be used. We're not going to close it. Right? It qualifies under that blanket purchase order that can still be used. So we'll go ahead and close that. But we have a second purchase order. And basically, similar accounting here. Line 1 has $159 that was opened as a blanket purchase order. We've converted $114 of it. Line 2 was opened with $291. And it's been fully converted, so there's nothing available from the second line. This says it's for the first quarter, October to December. And one thing that we should know about blanket purchase orders is when we put the quantity field with a value greater than 1, if we don't fully convert that quantity value, the purchase order remains open. So we can't use any more of the second line, but this first line still has roughly $45 left to be spent. And because we put that quantity field like this and didn't fully utilize it, Intacct will keep that open until us as a user takes action, whether it's we convert it to another voucher to pay that $45 or we're closing it. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and close this purchase order because we no longer need it. So from within the purchase order, we can convert to a closed partial PO. Notice the second line dropped off, and now all we have left is the quantity that was available from line 1. And then we can go ahead and post that, and it'll close the purchase order. Okay, not closing this one. I'm just showing how it can be done on the screen here, and that'll be up to the program to close it. So this is one way of using our purchasing list view and how to take advantage of these filters to really zero in on what we're looking for. It's likely we have this, like the blanket PO still open, purchase orders pending conversion. So if we use that, those are going to give us everything that's open, but it's not going to let us zero in like we did here by including a date filter. Because we don't want to look at recent things, we're looking at the older stuff to make sure the older things are being taken care of. So that's the first way. Most of us probably get what's open on our purchase orders though by running a financial report. So let me open a second Intacct tab. We can go to the report center. And we're going to run our fiscal year report for this fund. So now that the report is run, we have all our budget and financial transaction activity. We can see our utilities, encumbrances, our Rosebud Fair encumbrances. So if we're tracking these encumbrances, start verifying, it's from this screen that we can start to do that. So let's take a little bit different approach on this, and let's look at the Rosebud Fair expenses. We want to tie out this $298.87 in encumbrances. We can click on the $298.87 to get the general ledger listing of those encumbrances. Okay. So depending on how you've used this report before, what you see on screen might be organized a little bit differently. Like for me, it separates it into months so I can see January and February activity. We can change that. We can include the vendor information. So for the people that asked about how to include the vendor, not just the dollar amount, if I customize this general ledger report and come down here to show dimension values, what other dimensions do I want to include? I can find say the vendor ID and vendor name. I'm not running an employee report, so I can drop the employee name. So now we just have vendor ID, vendor name. You have an option of a lot of stuff here, your program, checkbook, funding source. So if you want the funding source included, you can add that too. We click done when we're ready. And we've seen how it was giving us a total by months. I have that set. I can uncheck that. Now if we view the report, how it was organized will change. Now it's all as one thing, not summarized by each month, and we can see the vendor number, the vendor name, and the funding source being used. And the next time I access this general ledger report, whether by directly going to general ledger or by clicking on one of the value amounts from a financial report, Intacct will remember my last settings. So now I can see what's building this $298 encumbrance. Number one, this Native Sun News has been open and paid, so that's not doing it, but this Todd County Tribune has 3 different entries that are contributing to the $298.87 encumbrance. So that was a pretty easy way to find it through our financial report, but not all transactions are going to be like this where there's just minimal amount for us to find. So this might not be the best way. Let's slide that off screen, and now let's look at a dimension balance report. So we'll go to General Ledger to Dimension Balances. It's going to default to the current month. So if I build the rest of the report and then run this, it's only going to give us the month of March. I want to run this whole fiscal year. So I could use the drop-down box and find fiscal current year, or I could type in October 1st through today if I wanted to do that, and it override what's picked up here. But I'm going to use the drop-down box. We need to use the encumbrances journal, so we're going to add that as the book. We don't want it to combine with our accrual book. The accrual book is where our expenses are posted. We only want to look at encumbrances, so we've got that going. We're going to use that Rosebud Fair line item. So So I've got that selected in the account from and account to field. So it's only going to look at this one account number. Now let's build the report just by adding our program, funding source, and checkbook. And then lastly, just like the general ledger report, show dimension values. What do we want displayed in this report? So I've got funding source ID and vendor ID. So it's going to tell me the funding source name, and then it's going to give me a list of the vendors who have encumbrances for the fiscal year. So now we can view this report. And here we are for Rosebud Fair. There's that same amount from our financial report, the $298, but this also has the benefit of adding the vendor to that. So if we're looking just for this information, we're good to go. We could go back to our purchasing list view and start looking for Todd County purchase orders. And there's a couple different ways you could run this report. You don't have to run it for just a certain expense line. We could run for all of our expenses. So instead of choosing a range, we can choose all accounts. We'll leave everything just as it is right now. And it's going to give us a list of all the accounts for these program, checkbook, and funding source, which vendors have open encumbrances. So we're getting no information, which we don't have to be discouraged by. What we didn't do in this all accounts is we needed to tell it we wanted all expense accounts. So here we are picking all expense general ledger accounts. Great, here we are. We have Cherry Todd with an encumbrance of $2,500, Todd County, and then River Bluff Strategies with an encumbrance as well. But we don't see the account numbers, even though we said all expense accounts, right? Under show dimension values, we can add that we want the account number displayed also. So I'm gonna change the order. I want the account number to show up first. So I'm gonna choose account ID and name, and then I want the vendor ID and name. So now I can see the encumbrance by lobbying, by utilities, and by Rosebud Fair. Pretty fast, simple way of getting the encumbrance by vendor that's currently on our financial report. And the last aspect of this is that purchasing transaction detail report. So we can use our financial report to give us a good summary of the line item. We can use the purchasing list transactions to give us a list of all open POs. This is going to give us the encumbrances by vendor. The purchasing transaction detail report is going to let us also search by the funding source. The purchasing list view doesn't give us the funding source option, and I know a lot of the programs out there have more than one funding source. So this is going to let us get into a little bit more detail. So we're searching for purchasing transaction detail report. This one's defaulting to the current fiscal year, so great. I don't need to make a change in the reporting period. I do need to tell it the checkbook I'm using and the program I'm using. If we're looking for a specific funding source, then we can enter that here, or we can leave it blank, and it would be for every funding source that you have access to under the program and checkbook combination. We want just the one funding source. If we know a specific vendor, so let's stick with that Todd County Tribune. And that line item, Rosebud Fair. We just want to look, we want to find what is still open from Todd County Tribune. Now we want to tell it the type of purchasing transaction we're looking for. We could leave it blank if we want it for all purchasing types, or we can select one of the types that are there. We're going to choose purchase order. We can only choose one transaction type at a time. So we're either going to search one type at once or all of them by leaving it blank. And now we need to say, what document state do we want to search for? If we're looking for stuff that needs our attention, it's not paid, it's still open, or it's pending, there's certain states that we need to find, which for our purchase order, we know pending is one. So I'm clicking on that to move it to being selected. And partially converted is the other. If we had a blanket purchase order that we've converted at least one time and it still has a balance remaining, we want to make sure we include the blanket purchase orders. So we want to bring back any pending or partially converted purchase orders. And now we can view the report. And that brings us to 3. So we have PO 59708 for $106, PO 60675 for $86, PO 60676 for $106. And so this would tie out to that dimension balance report, ties out to the general ledger. There's that balance for $298.87. Here's the balance for $298.87. We can see the memo that was used, so this kind of gives us a heads up on what we have going here. These aren't older than 60 days past due, so we're not going to worry about having to close those. But now we have an idea of what those encumbrances were, that our open POs match our financial report, and we know to keep an eye on these to be looking for any of our invoices from County Tribune. So when we're talking about the budget, it's going to be about, are we keeping up with our expenses? So an example here, are we keeping up with payroll, gross, and fringe expenses? Payroll charges are posted by journal entry via Workforce Go, so there's no budget verification like when we make a purchasing request. And I have a snapshot of a program's budget here, and I have 2 different examples. The red one, we have a line item called elected officials with a budget and no charges. So if we're expecting to have charges for elected officials up to this point, that's a red flag to us that there might not be something correct with how a person's set up in Workforce Go. And then I have the yellow line item for the COVID admin leave. We see charges but no budget. So I point out payroll because that's probably the most common one that we'll see where there's charges and either it's under budgeted or there's no budget at all. So as we're looking at our budget reports, this is what we're looking for. These things that are flagging to us that there's a potential issue with your budget. If we're the program and we see those charges without a budget or it's underfunded, we have a responsibility to take care of that through a budget change request. Or on this other line where we see a budget but no charges, do we have a plan for other charges that should be happening soon? You know, if this were utilities or fuel or whatever it would be, there's nothing charged. We're halfway through the year. Are we still expecting to use that line item between now and the end of this year? Or is this a line item we would move the budget into other lines to accommodate what that's actually getting used? Or in this case, this program should expect to see charges for an elected official and there's nothing there. So as we're looking at our financial report, that's going to raise a flag that we're going to direct to the program monitor's attention. Why isn't this person's payroll getting charged to this line item? They might not be set up correctly, so when their charges are coming in, it could be getting pulled in with the rest of the tribal employees and not on elected officials. So these are things we want to look out for, and we're looking at this and trying to determine if there's future expenses planned here in this line item, is there enough to cover that? Is there something that's changed with our operating year? That's why there's no charges here. And so now maybe we don't need to have that budget there. We can put it in a place where it's more effective to serve the public at large. Can we use the activity so far to forecast where we'll be at the end of the year? So this is going to be that forecasting or the comparative report that we have out there. Is there enough budget to accommodate the current pace of spending? So the screenshot from this report has that we have a balance or a budget of $110,000. And so far that line has been charged $56,000 for an average of $10,600 a month. There's 6.5 months left in this fiscal year. So I took the average amount of spending, $10,676, multiplied it by about the time left, which give us, there's going to be about $69,000 more in charges placed on this line. The 69 plus the current charge of $56,000 would total $125,000, which means that halfway throughout this year, we can see that we would end up going over budget. So we can make those kind of projections with the reports we have available to us and start taking action now instead of at the end of the year when we're running out of budget and trying to crunch out a last minute purchase order or a last minute change request to get a purchase order through. So in the reports center for Intacct, you're going to see two new reports. One is the current year spending forecast, and one is the current and prior fiscal year comparisons. So the report I'm using was this current year spending forecast. And just pretty simply, we're going to see our line item. Here's what we've spent this year, or here's our budget. Here's what we've spent, and here's what the monthly average of spend is right now, based on how far we're at within the month. So this isn't a full 6 months. This is like 5.5 months as an average. And so we can see the monthly average, and we can use that now to project out the rest of time where we would potentially end up with each of our line items. Does that need our attention now rather than a few months down the road when we can't submit something and causing a delay for us to wait until our change request gets approved? And it's, a pretty easy report to see. The other one, current and prior fiscal year comparisons. Works just like any other report. We're giving it our program, checkbook, and funding source. As of what date do we want to see this? So it's got 3/10 on it, and even right here, it's giving us a little note. It's going to tell us it's going to go from 10/1/21 through today, and then last year, same time. So this report, we can see, like if we look at attorney fees, through this year, we've had $2,400 in charges for attorney fees. Last year at the same point was $26,000. So that's a $23,000 decline. So we get the difference plus a little red arrow or a green arrow if it went up. So you can use this to just compare where you're at from last year to this year. That might find a big flag for you for what is something changed in the same period of operation compared to last year that we need to be aware of. That kind of stuff, or like here, indirect costs, there's been no charges yet this year, but at the same point last year, there's $115,000 in charges. So as the program for this funding source, this would be worth looking into the difference. Why? Should we expect to see this charge at some point, or what's changed so that we don't have those types of charges anymore on our financial report? And you can do that and see the little arrows that tell us where the big changes are. This line item that's highlighted now has expenses this year but didn't last year. And so for your reports, you're obviously going to see different lines and should see varying changes between last year and this year that should spark interest in why those changes are the way they are. What is contributing to the difference for you? And does that require your attention now? If we're this program, we run the report. Here's that current year column, last year for prior year, and then the difference between then and now. We can see a tremendous change in revenue, $266,000 decline compared to the same point as last year. Charges for employees have gone down dramatically. And other line items obviously went down a lot, especially because the revenue is down so much. The spending isn't going to be the same. But this allows us to have a quick and easy comparison. So when we discuss our program, we can have an educated response as to what's changing or what has changed from last year to this year. This big drop in revenue, that gives us a clue in now that we need to go searching, why is our revenue $266,000 less now than it was last year? Were the sales or the types of revenue we're making last year, were those like one-time type of sales that we won't see again? So we shouldn't be planning on having that type of budget level anymore in our proposals. up to us to interpret that information the way it needs to be, right? Thank you, everybody, for your time. Enjoy the rest of the day.